Hi guys, welcome back to Foliage Loft. My name is Liam, and today I'm going to give you 5 essential tips to help you out when you're watering your plants. Now, watering your plants seems like the absolute easiest thing in the world, but there are a few key things to remember to keep your plants healthy and happy. But before we get into that list, I just want to remind you to subscribe to my channel if you're interested in this content, and if this video helps you out in some way, definitely hit that like button down below. Now let's get into the list. Now, I think this first tip is something that's pretty easy to neglect, but it's something that can cause a lot of damage and give you a lot of issues with your plants, and that is the temperature of your water. The root systems of plants, and especially tropical houseplants, are very sensitive to drastic changes in temperature, and in their natural environment, they're typically used to having warm water fall from the sky. And when these plants are in your care, they're definitely going to want that same treatment. Now, I'd say room temperature water is just fine, but if you can have that water just be a little bit warm, it's going to be even better for your plants. But you definitely want to avoid cold water at all costs, and if you're filling it up from the tap, just allow it to warm up a little bit before you fill up your watering can. I've even seen some houseplants in big box stores or grocery stores that have those little tags in, and it'll tell you to water your plants with 2 or 3 ice cubes, and this is actually a really bad idea. That really cold temperature of the water can cause some root shock to your plants, and it can have some really bad effects. So it could either drop some leaves, your plant could go dormant thinking that winter is coming, and it could even die. So definitely make sure when you're watering your plants that your water is either room temperature or lukewarm. So I think most beginners think there's just one way to water your plants, and that's to use your watering can and pour the water directly over the soil and allow it to drain through the soil. But there is another method, and that's bottom watering. And there are a few benefits to bottom watering as opposed to top watering. It can encourage the roots in your pot to kind of reach downwards and grow towards that moisture that's coming from the bottom. So it's a great way to encourage root growth. And it can also help the moisture spread evenly throughout the soil. So soil has this property called capillary action where water can just spread through it, fighting against the force of gravity. So it's going to evenly spread upwards throughout the soil. And bottom watering is also a great way to prevent certain houseplant pests from multiplying. If you've ever seen these tiny little flies buzzing around your houseplants, those are fungus gnats, and those typically reproduce in the top layer of the soil. And to reproduce, they want really moist conditions. And by top watering, you're going to make sure that top layer is super wet, and fungus gnats are going to love it and call it home, and you want to avoid that. When you bottom water, that top layer is going to stay a little bit more dry, not completely soaking wet, and it's going to prevent these fungus gnats from laying their eggs. Now, one thing to keep in mind about bottom watering is that it can allow excess salts and minerals to build up in the soil, and you don't really want that in the long term. So every now and again, let's say once every month or once every 6 weeks, do make sure you do a nice thorough top watering and flush the soil. And all you need to do is just top water and pour in an excessive amount of water and allow the water to drain through the pot for about 20 to 30 seconds, and that should do the trick. So this guy is my #1 tool when it comes to watering my plants. This is my moisture meter, and these guys are super inexpensive. You can probably find them for $5 to $10 at your local dollar store or hardware store, and this is going to make a huge difference in both the health and the growth of your plants. So you can see there's this little meter, or some of the fancier ones have a screen, I guess, but you simply stick it in the soil and it'll tell you exactly what the moisture level is down below the soil. And this is great for those picky plants that want to be watered at a certain time. So for instance, something like a calathea, which wants to generally stay just pretty moist overall, not super wet or super dry. And finding this precarious balance without something like this would be pretty difficult. So this is definitely a tool I recommend to all plant people out there. Just go pick one up. It's going to save you a lot of hassle. So this tip is definitely not universal, but I think for most people that live in big cities, your tap water is going to be processed, and it's going to have some things in it that are really good for you, but not so good for your plants. So some of these additives that are in tap water, like chlorine, can actually build up inside your plants, and over time you're going to get some really nasty, crispy brown spots on the tips of your leaves. And if you allow this problem to build up over time, it's going to cause more problems with your plant. So you can see, for example, on my Dracaena marginata here, that these are the kinds of issues you can run into. You can see these brown tips on the leaves here. Now, a better solution for your plants is to use distilled water. And distilled water is pretty much just pure, plain water. Now, you can make your own distilled water at home, but it can be a little bit of a pain to set it up, or you can buy machines to do this, but I just buy my distilled water at the grocery store. Now, another great option to use is rainwater. So if you can find some way to collect rainwater on your property, that's going to be great. It has tons of great minerals and nutrients inside for your plants. And especially if you have one of those really big barrels that collects all the water for you and it sits outside in the sun, it's going to actually warm it up a little bit, and that's going to be great for your plants too. Now, if distilled water or rainwater are both not options for you, you can definitely just use filtered water. So fill up your Brita filter, just don't put it in the fridge, just leave it out at room temperature, and that'll be great for your plants too. So this is my final tip, and perhaps the most important if you are forgetful like me. It's actually to use an app to remind you when to water your plants. I personally use an app called Planta. There are some premium features that you have to pay for, but the basic functionality is free. So you would simply search up your plant that you have, you add it to your collection, and it'll give you reminders when to water your plants. It does take into account what kind of pot your plant is in, as well as your location and your hardiness zone, to determine how often it will remind you to water your plants. Now, if you do go around and check your plants and the app is telling you to water it and it's not quite ready yet, you can snooze the plant and it'll remind you again in 2 days. So for me, I find it to be a great system, and it's awesome if you have just a lot of plants to remember. You know, if you have something like 100 or more plants, and it's hard to keep track, right? If you're watering these plants once a week or sometimes even more often. And obviously there are always plants that we don't care about quite as much as some of our favorite plants, so this is a great way to keep those lesser plants alive. And the app also has some other features. It will occasionally allow you to give your plants a progress update, where you could rate how your plant is growing from poorly to excellently. And you can also leave some notes for yourself, maybe about new care techniques you're using for a plant to help determine whether they're beneficial in the long term. There are definitely other options out there other than the app that I use, which is Planta. So check them all out. They're all on the App Store on both iPhone and Android, and see if they're going to help you out. But it's definitely helped me become a better plant parent, and I think there's probably going to be some utility there for you too. So that's going to be it for my 5 essential tips for watering your houseplants. There are definitely other things to consider, but I think these 5 things will get you well on your way. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope this video helped you out. See ya.